Hello, and welcome to this online presentation of Health or Disease, the Nutritional Approach. As many of you know, I spend a lot of time promoting good dietary health and answering a lot of questions. So whether this is for you or perhaps you want to share the information you've learned with a friend or a family member, or less likely, you just like hearing me talk, well, I hope you find this information helpful and that it supports your health endeavors. Now, before we jump in, a little disclaimer. I have to say this information is not endorsed by the FDA. This information is intended for education and promoting good health based on accurate research. This isn't intended to be a diagnosis of any disease or a specific treatment for any disease. Now, the object for today is to discuss the ramifications to our health due to this very clear depiction of our currently out of control dietary world and the corresponding out of control health problems. But in order to do that, we have to have a much more accurate understanding of this mess we're in, followed by actionable steps that truly make metabolic changes, not just a simple shift in a diet or the conventional approach of masking symptoms. So this is me, so let me start by saying I'm very passionate about what I do, but my passion originated in sort of an odd way. See, aside from my education and career, I'm actually a very good cook. It started when I was a kid. My mom was a great cook, and I took an early interest. She taught me a lot, and I continued on with it in college, where I worked as a lead line cook at some very good restaurants and trained under about 4 very good chefs. To this day, my wife is not allowed in the kitchen. That's a joke that sometimes is funny with her, but she's a little sensitive. Anyway, in college, my undergraduate degree was microbiology. I did take some nutrition classes, but my focus was virology. In fact, I started into graduate school in molecular virology, but then moved to Seattle and worked at the University of Washington Medical Center, Department of Laboratory Medicine and Infectious Diseases. I was a contributing author on 4 research papers and first authored 1 paper. I started in HIV-related research, but the majority of the time I was doing molecular cloning in hepatitis C, attempting to characterize the different strains of hepatitis C virus for potential liver transplant patients. Eventually, I found my calling in natural health care and came out here to Davenport to attend Palmer College, and I've never looked back. While I love what I do as a chiropractor, the opportunity to help people and literally change lives with nutrition has been absolutely amazing. For over 20 years now, I've studied nutrition research, provided many talks, and I've written a lot. I have been performing nutritional assessments, consulting, and advising many patients on their health concerns from the standpoint of restoring the body's optimal balances. Over the years, I've witnessed many successful outcomes and very happy patients. But honestly, most of the time, the successes have been a challenge. And the reason is not that nutritional or functional healthcare is ineffective or faulty. It's because people are confused, misled, and overwhelmed with the wrong path. Hence this presentation. Now, I need to make an important clarification. Again, I am extremely passionate about what I do, and if you don't already know that about me, just ask any of my nutrition patients. I want to be very clear about this, so don't get me wrong. I believe medical doctors are good people, and I believe they have good intentions. I also know that trauma or emergency care in this country is the best in the world. Should I ever need ER care, God forbid, there's nowhere I'd rather be. I also know that medical intervention does save lives, and in many cases is the only available option. However, when it comes to managing the true pandemic, which is chronic degenerative disease, Western medicine fails miserably. Again, I'm not intending to badmouth the doctors, but the methods of allopathic medicine, which is treating symptoms with pharmaceutical drugs, do not address nor approach correcting the underlying cause of most degenerative disease. When health predicaments become dire, medical intervention is critical. However, I don't know of a single individual who wants to experience the loss of their health, then be placed on medications, let alone dependent on them for survival. I'm sure that most everyone would prefer to live a normal life with a healthy functioning body and eventually succumb after living a full life. I'm sure we can all agree that the preferred way to live for ourselves, our family, our parents, and especially our children is to support a fully functioning healthy body and to restore good health when it goes off track in the most natural way and ultimately to avoid chasing symptoms. So in this presentation, I'm likely going to stir up some feelings and confront some very bad, long-standing, misguided, and blatantly erroneous declarations and beliefs about our health and our dietary lifestyles. When I first discovered this picture, I couldn't believe it. It's a perfect depiction for the exact problem that so many people struggle with. And as you're going to see, this is probably the greatest obstacle that we have to deal with to overcome our growing health problems. You see, we've seriously lost our way and our understanding of what real food is and why we need it. It has become entirely confusing and mainly not at all nature's intended way of deriving our nourishment. We literally can't decipher right from wrong, especially young people and children who are now growing up in an almost entirely artificial food era. People are literally dying to know what is wrong with their health and how to fix it. When it comes to real pandemic of chronic degenerative disease, the vast majority of the public media, the dogma of healthcare, which is actually disease care, and so much misleading and censored information, the answer for many is troublesome. Now, I'm going to assume that everyone here, regardless of your current health status, is at least on some good intentions path to a better diet, better health, or effective weight loss. So as I speak on how we've lost our way, I mean as a society as a whole, not the great influencers, or not how the great influencers, like media persuasion, are a major obstruction to accurate information and an enormous detriment to our health. I intend to clear the fog, as you will see, and provide some tools for correcting imbalances and for restoring health and to promote fostering a healthy lifestyle or sustainable weight loss, or whatever the goals may be. This next slide is going to be a little short video that uses this image to depict man's creation of our true health pandemic. This is one of those pictures that paints 1,000 words, but I wanted to do a little more with it. So I'm going to manipulate and morph this picture to demonstrate how we've allowed our dietary world to go completely off track. The first thing I need to do is change the perspective of this for the sake of the timeline and place real food on the left, as that reflects what we have eaten since the beginning of mankind. Then if I morph this out so that it represents our diet over time, you'll see that it reflects that we have eaten nothing but clean, unadulterated, whole, plant-based food for thousands of years. As this converts to a timeline, notice again that it reveals no recorded evidence of any chronic degenerative disease for thousands of years, all throughout man's consumption of clean, unadulterated, plant-based diet, or some may refer to it as a paleo diet. And then somewhere around 170 to 200 years ago, man thought he could improve on nature and things drastically changed. We began producing foods that are highly processed, containing high amounts of refined sugars, bad oils, and GMO grains, to name a few. And that marked the genesis of man-made foodborne chronic degenerative disease. In man's determination to fix these problems, he created man-made chemicals known as pharmaceutical drugs. From the beginning of man's modernized revolutions of changing our foods and approach to health, chronic degenerative disease has done nothing but worsen. Life has proliferated for thousands of years. Since man's meddling, chronic disease has gone rampant. This has all happened inside of the past 200 years. There's no denying the fact that since man has tried to recreate, substitute, or trick nature, the outcome is clearly a failure. Okay, here it is. You may have heard this before, but there's no way around it. We've all probably heard this before, but it is so very true. As you're going to learn, food truly is what heals us. But we take for granted the lethal effects of bad food because it happens slowly and subtly. But it happens. We think we're getting away with it, but history and research and of course time have proven otherwise. So even though this is proven to be true, or even if it may have already experienced, if we may have already experienced it ourselves, why is it so difficult to put into practice? Because when it comes to accurately educating people about the foods we eat and how it affects our health, there are two big challenges. For most people in this country, nutrition is not a favorite topic. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of hype, a ton of outdated, misguided, and false information. But the first roadblock that I come up against all the time is that most people just don't want to hear about what they should or shouldn't be eating and how it may be affecting their health. It is said that it's easier to change a man's religion than to change his diet. The second biggest reason, this is one of the main reasons why I state that the fate of your good health is in your own hands, is that we are up against powerful adversaries in the food and drug industries who have no intention to sacrifice their shareholders' profits nor forfeit the market control for the sake of our well-being. These industry giants enjoy nearly unlimited resources for their stake in the market share of our consumerism. They have a different agenda and they do not care. The amount of money in politics surrounding the food industry alone is staggering, and as a result, the government agencies designed to protect our best health interests have been incapable of doing so. I'm going to relate a story about that. To demonstrate, in 2010, the American Heart Association went to Washington to meet with Congress to create an RDA for sugar. Now understand that there is an RDA for salt and for fat, and that just is a guideline to give you an idea where you're at and what you may be consuming or what's in a particular food, so you can kind of keep track of it through your meals or through your daily intake. But there is no RDA that has been established for sugar. But after every branch of the food industry showed up, the American Heart Association lost to the food industry. The reason, they could not make the kinds of foods that people are demanding if that regulation were put in place. That is insane. The American Heart Association, who's literally looking out for our best interests, lost to the food industry about our health. So who's more important? Once again, greed and politics win over public health and safety. And again, this is why your health is in your own hands. Now this is the typical dilemma facing everyone. Here's a question. Can anyone tell me who is the biggest target for food industry ads? Probably picked it out. It's children. They are by far the biggest targets. Unfortunately, they're the ones who have the most to lose. The underlying factor of food marketing is addiction. Food companies are promoting it and thrive by it, and the consumers are victim to it almost unwittingly. It's huge business, and they've created the mentality that if it's not sweeter, saltier, have more flavorful fat, larger in size, then there's no interest in eating it. Besides sugar and just simply being addicted to food, there's another unknown addiction with food, and that's the addiction of the size and the amount of food going into the mouth. Now, another story. Understand this. Food manufacturers don't have a Betty Crocker in the kitchen coming up with new recipe ideas. That's all very scientific. They use formulas for bliss factor for the perfect amount of pinnacle, or the perfect pinnacle of amount of sugar, mouthfeel for the ideal fat content composition, and the burst effect describe the amount of salt that stimulates the tongue the best. But the real disgusting secret weapon of the food industry is their exploitation of children. So in their luxurious state-of-the-art facilities, they sit some young kids down at the table and set in front of them some yogurt samples and tell them they want their help in determining which is the very best flavor. But first they bring out a giant stuffed Big Bird. Remember Big Bird from Muppets, I think it was? That's right. And they tell them that this is now yours to keep. It's like a 6-foot tall, huge bird, very, very luxurious. And they don't want you to make, they want you to make sure your Big Bird is very well cared for and that he gets the very best food. So we want you to tell us which of these yogurts will make your new best friend the happiest and healthiest Big Bird he can possibly be. Is that child psychology manipulation or what? Can they actually do these things? So think really hard about whose decision is it for the foods you consume, and especially the foods you provide to your children. Is it you or is it them? So coming back to this proverbial fork in the road, you can see how even with the best intentions, it's getting more and more muddled as to whose choice or what choices to make and who's making those choices for you. And I get it, even if you're trying to decipher all the noise, it's still difficult to point or to know where to turn. Now I want you to think about this. This is my first important message. All the marketing that you're exposed to all the time about all these poor and alternative food choices, it costs a ton of money. But at this level, the money is nothing compared to the politics and economic control. The more you see an ad, the more spectacular it is, speaks volumes of how much they want to coerce you. I'm sure you've all heard the phrase standard American diet, and the more appropriate shortened version, SAD. This has been the bane of our dietary-based health problems for a long time. No matter how much increased awareness there has been for better diet, these numbers haven't changed much since the last time I pulled these statistics from over 10 years ago. What's worse, it's getting more prevalent worldwide. When other countries in Europe, for instance, who have had a fraction of the disease statistics that the U.S. has, when they start to take on our dietary patterns, their disease epidemics follow suit. So you can see that the food consumption, for fast food consumption among our population is quite staggering. It's nearly half the population, especially for younger people, and that is not good. And processed food consumption is a significant amount of the food we consume, and that's very, very bad for our health. When you take a closer look at processed packaged foods, 90% of these foods are comprised of four predominant components. These GMO constituents are heavily contaminated with glyphosate, which is a Roundup, which has been shown in many ads nowadays that is very, very cancer causing, and lawyers are going after trying to help people and get reimbursed from legal mandates from people using this toxin. And even newer, more toxic chemicals. The genetic alterations are shown to cause toxic effects such as hepatic, pancreatic, renal, or reproductive effects, and may alter the hematological, biochemical, and immunological parameters. That is a quote out of Critical Reviews in Food Science and Nutrition from 2009. We have the metabolic capacity to eat about a half a pound of meat per week. Most Americans eat over a half a pound per day. This meat is from, in most cases, tortured animals in refined quarters, often never seeing the sun, fed food that was entirely unnatural to them, so they are constantly sick and therefore pumped with antibiotics and growth hormones, at least for cows, and which brings them to slaughter faster. And chickens are fed arsenic, which makes them hungry all the time, but also adds to the toxins. These drugs and toxins do not cook out of the meat. Farmed fish are also fed unnatural diets and kept in containment pens where disease spreads and toxins accumulate at high concentrations. You assume to get a lot of omega-3s from fish, but they're fed corn, which is the opposite of omega-3. It's an inflammatory fat. We can discuss that later. Digestive disorders is the #1 leading health disaster, which are typically the first problem that leads to further health decline and disease. Most don't know or understand it, and they treat the symptoms with antacids, acid-stopping meds, and other gastric symptom relievers like they're candy, all the while they're only literally throwing fuel on the fire. Finally, more and more studies are coming out that show the standard American diet is the underlying cause of all chronic degenerative disease. I put this up mainly to show that these statistics are not only startling, but they haven't changed in almost 20 years. The last data I had was from the early 2000s, and it was pretty much the same. And I have personally known some people who had serious aversions to eating vegetables. They had significant health problems, and they died early. I know a couple personally. One statistic I recently read stated that 25% of Americans have never eaten a vegetable. I don't know how that's even possible. But the point is that we do not eat the foods that we are designed and intended to eat. We've lost track of what that's supposed to be. Okay, here's a fun little quiz. Who can name the 4 most common consumed vegetables in the U.S.? Here's the top 2, this one and this one, and then we have a couple others right here. But what do you think? Well, the top 2 are potatoes and tomatoes, and then there's onions and head lettuce. Now, out of these 4 right here, what do you think what comprises these 4 top leading vegetables? The burger basket, French fries and ketchup. French fries and ketchup, the most prominent foods that we consume per person. Almost 50 pounds per year of potatoes, 30 pounds of tomatoes. Now, this is also tomatoes like on burgers and so forth, and then onions and head lettuce, which is pretty much devoid of nutrients. And then down here we have sweet corn, which is in everything like chips, tortillas, just very simple. And this is also very high inflammatory fats And then carrots, because it's sweet. It's probably the only vegetable that, not the only, but it's a common, simple vegetable that most children will eat if they eat any vegetables. And then I'm surprised romaine and leaf lettuce is on here, but good thing that it is on here. Oh, and the U.S. Still to this day, the U.S. school system still classifies ketchup as a vegetable. That's pretty pathetic. Okay, even though these sources are a little old, it's still a problem. Conventional produce is still deficient in mineral content. In 2011, the CDC declared the U.S. has the worst mineral depleted soils with 85% depletion of, and that's in commercial produce. So the average vegetable today is low in minerals, important ones, magnesium. Who's heard the fact that we're all deficient in magnesium and iron, and nobody is high in zinc. I have a zinc test that shows pretty much anybody that does it is deficient in zinc. Between 1940 and 1991, there was a significant reduction in mineral content um, in fruits, vegetables, and even meat has a decline in mineral content because what are cattle being fed? Just, grain that's also deficient. And calcium content in broccoli from 1950 to 2003 had a 66% decrease. So this is a significant depletion of minerals, which are vitally important to the way our metabolism works. You can't, metabolism doesn't work without minerals and vitamins. The minerals are kind of the lock and key. It's the minerals are the key to make the vitamins work and do their